Hello.
Welcome to the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. I'm Joe Patrice. That's Catherine Rubino. We're from Above the Law, which you theoretically are reading, but if you aren't and you're just listening to the podcast, you can also check out our work there.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know if there were people who only listen to the podcast, not get the Reader's Digest version from us here, necessarily. Yeah, no, it would be interesting. Anyway, yes, so once again, we are here to talk about some of the big legal stories of the week to keep you informed on the world of Above the Law. So came out of a holiday weekend. But we just left a very big legal week, as these things go.
That is true. The holiday weekend came right on the heels of a lot of Supreme Court news.
Boo.
Both, not necessarily great, as well as the continuing push towards raises and stuff, which we've already talked about. We've got
ad nauseum, but people are excited that they're getting money, and we're here for that.
Yeah, no. But yeah.
How was your holiday weekend, Joe, before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty?
Sure. Good,
So the
it was
cataclysmic climate change didn't...
Yeah, I mean, it was cold and rainy on...
It was in the 60s on July 3rd.
Yeah.
That is not normal.
Yeah, that's more what should be happening in places like Portland, which were instead 118 degrees. But yeah. No, it's...
Are you ready for like the Mad Max level of climate change that I feel like we're about to enter in on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm stockpiling gasoline and
milk, I think, right?
Yeah, shotguns. Yeah, no, it's going to be just like Mad Max.
Yeah, but you're not really, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, it's concerning. There are actually people in this country that are actually doing those things. So
right.
Let's clarify.
No.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad that you're not actually a
baby doll
prepper.
heads and stuff for the elaborate outfit I'll have to do. And
yeah, I mean, you're ready for it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it fits my general style now, That's what people think when they think of me, like that I dress, in that kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a bandolero of bullets and baby doll heads.
Yeah.
That seems right.
That's
on brand.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I've been preparing for a long time,
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, some people haven't prepared for it. Some people went to law school to be a lawyer, not an accountant or, a post-apocalyptic warlord. But if you went to law school to be a lawyer and not an accountant, take advantage of Nota, a no-cost IOLTA management tool to help solo and small law firms track client funds down to the penny. Enjoy peace of mind with one-click reconciliation, automated transaction alerts, and real-time bank data. Visit trustnota.com/legal to learn more. Terms and conditions may apply. So, yeah.
So now that we have this unsettling image of you in a post-apocalyptic
dressed like
world.
Zardoz,
Yeah.
Which isn't the name of the character in that movie. I actually don't know what the name of the character in that movie is. Anyway, point is...
now that we have an even deeper understanding of your brain, it's just not great for anybody, actually.
So, speaking of people's brains that aren't great for anybody... There was a voting rights case last week, and it was...
Democracy was a fun experiment while it lasted.
It was. Brnovich came down, it was 6-3. There had been some, as it was delayed and delayed and delayed.
Wishful thinking.
Wishful thinking had existed that maybe Alito, who won by reading tea leaves, could have assumed was writing the majority opinion, that he had gone so far that he'd managed to lose a majority, and there was some scrambling. As it turns out,
nope,
that's not the case. Not only did he not lose the majority, he also managed to fend off any kind of watering down concurrences. And there's one concurrence that actually goes the extra mile of, we were kind of thinking maybe we could just get rid of this altogether. But as it is, what happened is, I mean, look, there were a couple of voting provisions, questionable whether or not, you could make good faith arguments against them if you wanted to, but that's not really how, that's
not how this works.
That's not how Supreme Court decisions work. It has very little to do with what the actual provision that they struck down was. What we got was Alito drawing up a new 5-part test that essentially rewrote the actual statute with no real reference to anything that's actually in the statute. In fact, it was pointed out by I think Scott Lemieux on Twitter. I can't remember who it was from Lawyers, Guns, and Money, but he put up a thing somewhere that pointed out that there was a effort in 1982 to write a more restrictive version of the Voting Rights Act that Roberts was actually very involved in at the time.
And it failed.
But it didn't explicitly failed. But what really happened here in this opinion is Roberts, along with Alito, rewrote what actually happened as though that law had passed, even though it was roundly rejected.
That's really a moment where the myth of textualism gets blown up, right? Because there was an option for this more restrictive version when the law was passed, but rather than acknowledge that that is not what Congress decided to pass in the 80s, they just went as if it had gone the way they had advocated for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us know that there's not really much, principle behind some of these legal theories.
I mean, here, back up for a second, right? Because I think that I think that
beep beep beep.
Are you done now?
Maybe
beep. No, but I think that savvy court readers or observers are very aware that textualism and originalism are just words that are given to a very clear political point of view without any sort of rigorous academic underpinnings. But I do think that the terminology, the PR battle that the right wing of legal jurisprudence has engaged in for generations has been very effective. And it makes young folk or people who are not currently enmeshed in the world of legal jurisprudence, it often will grab people because it seems like there is some sort of a clear doctrine that you can follow and there's a process involved as opposed to a pure naked politicalism. And I think it's important to constantly point out what it is.
Yeah, there is none. It is a very snappy public relations move, and
And I think that's incredibly important to constantly point out when they make this sort of counter allegations about the left wing of jurisprudence.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And Justice Kagan wrote a dissent that was very good.
Glorious. It was a glorious dissent.
Just really just kind of playing with, like, look, my issues with Justice Kagan a lot of the time is I feel like she uniquely stands up for some of those empty PR things in an attempt to subvert them. Like she will be the one who says, well, we're all liberal textualists now. Like, and it's like, no, you don't try to glom onto those tools as though you're going to use them against them. But whatever. But in this instance, it was a very good, very textualist response explaining how this statute is ridiculously clear about what it intends. There was no question about it, and it is a real breach of any kind of judicial ethics to try and rewrite the text of the statute like they did. And I mean, if you read Alito's opinion, it's like embarrassingly transparent what's going on. There's an effort over a couple of paragraphs where he's like, well, if Random House Dictionary defines this one word out of context as this, and Random House also has this other word out of context, this, and then if you put them together as a phrase, but use those definitions, then what it means is
in context.
Well, it real bad.
I mean, here's a follow-up question to some things you've said on this podcast before, right? Given the sort of naked politicalism of the Alito's decision,
is politicalism a word? I don't know. Maybe it is. I mean, it's clear what it means.
Now it is.
I guess now that you've made it a word, I mean, that's kind of similar to how they made originalism word, I guess. So.
Fair.
It's your new judicial philosophy.
All words are made up.
Politicalism.
FYI. No, but given the sort of the reality of the decision and given the court's current composition, it doesn't look like any voting rights protection would be upheld in the way that any Congress would intend it. Given that kind of background and your historic opposition to court expansion,
yes.
How do you think, given this decision, how do you think that plays into your opinions on expanding the Supreme Court?
I still feel my issue, I still stand by it, as bad as things are. I just feel like the long-term solution that we need is not a knee-jerk add more people at this point because it's broken. It's to develop a consistent staggered term limit policy that has every president getting 2 picks per term. It will not immediately fix things, but it will fix things better over the long term. And that's like ultimately the problems with the structure of the court right now are not there's a bunch of 40-year-old conservatives on it, which
is also a problem.
is a symptom. But the problem is we have a court that rewards pushing zygotes onto the bench so that they can stay for decades and decades and be a dead hand extension of not what America necessarily is voting for.
At the moment, yeah.
If you think that the key to the Supreme Court is that it be, as the founders clearly did, a kind of lagging indicator of American politics, that it's not turning with the whims every year, but that it reflects what people thought in the past when they voted for a president and Congress in the past and then stuck around, then the way of fixing that is to say, hey, it will be a lagging indicator by 18 years that presidents get 2 picks. They go, every 2 years, they go on, they get to stay until their run is up at the end of 18 years. And that maintains the don't push children onto the court, because 18 years, you can have a little bit older a person who can still make it 18 years in a job. And you can have a system where it is that good extension of the past, but not one that allows a president to basically control dead hand policy for 50 years.
Yeah, and the other part about it is, particularly when you look at John Roberts' role in the 80s and his effort to change the Voting Rights Act, and now his role in actually changing the Voting Rights Act, I think that there is also an argument for playing the long game.
Yeah.
And we've seen sort of that play out on the conservative side, and perhaps there's some room for that on the left wing to play the longer game, which I think is what you're advocating for.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned the longer game, because over at Slate, Dahlia Lithwick and Mark Joseph Stern just wrote a piece that there was, in the middle of the term, there were some people saying, oh, no, this isn't a 6-3 court, it's a 3-3-3 court, and all this kind of attempts
bullshit,
to horse race it in ways that didn't really make a lot of sense. But I do think that they make a great point that there is a 3-3-3 breakdown here. But what that breakdown is about is the 3, and sometimes 4, because Gorsuch kind of flips between the 2 of them, but the 3 conservatives who look around and go, we're going to be here till 2040 or 2050, so we don't need to move very quickly. And the old conservatives who are like, is there a way we can remove the First Amendment tomorrow? So not all the First Amendment, just parts of the First Amendment that don't allow you to discriminate against gay people.
Sure.
But that's the distinction, is the people who know that they're playing a long game and are willing to have decisions that kill precedent by 1,000 cuts because they know they're going to be there forever.
Yeah,
I think it's a very interesting distinction, and you can kind of see it when you read those.
When you're looking for it,
Yeah. Anyway, so that happened. One of the great, before he joined the Supreme Court, what Justice Breyer was known for? Being a nationally renowned expert in admin law. And I'm going to talk about this because maybe you have administrative tasks that you want to streamline. I'm trying here. So let's hear from
definitely are trying.
Let's hear from our friends from Lexicon, and then we'll chat a little bit about Breyer.
Here's a message just for the attorneys out there. So you passed the bar, joined a firm, or even built your own. Now are you finding out that you're doing more administration than actual law practice? Lexicon can help. Lexicon is a legal services and technology provider with over a decade of experience streamlining administrative tasks like timekeeping, HR, billing, client intake, and more, so you can focus on maximizing billable hours and increasing client satisfaction. Call 855-4LEXICON or visit lexiconservices.com/go to learn more.
Yes.
So, before we get started, here's a trivia question for you.
Okay.
Who was the last Supreme Court justice appointed by a Democrat to retire?
Yes. Well, I asked you this question, so I do know the answer. That would be Byron Whizzer White, who retired in the 90s, having been appointed.
Also the only
60s,
Supreme Court justice to have played professional football.
Correct. Yeah. No. And that's
a long time ago. it is possible. You can retire. It's not a personal failing to retire.
Yeah. And unfortunately, that is how some people think of it. There is a weird quirk to how justices who were actually, in fact, Republicans, but shifted to the left as the years went on, are more responsible about keeping the court institutionally protected and moving in kind of a more quasi-bipartisan way than the actual Democrats or Republicans generally have been.
Perhaps they understand the notion of bipartisanism in a more profound way.
Yeah, because like your Souters and Stevenses are, have done more to kind of contribute to keeping the court as an institution on track than anyone else. It's just really unfortunate. I mean, the thing that really burns me, and this is a good transition because you were talking about how originalism is ultimately completely empty philosophy.
Empty signifier.
But it's good PR. But at least it's a good PR that they can kind of always concoct a story of how they're really following it because it's that empty signifier. Breyer seems to very much in his books and all play to this idea that he's a pragmatist. He's not liberal or anything, it just happens to be that he's a pragmatist, and that tends to work out this way. But it is equally a empty judicial philosophy. I mean, it's a basic center-left legal philosophy that he just dresses up in apolitical language because nobody wants to make it sound like they're political on the court. And the proof of why and where he kind of fails compared to the originalists is in trying to find a way to constantly live out that rhetoric. Because if you say you're a pragmatist and
you should retire,
soon to be 83, refuse to retire, it really does raise the question how much you really think about the pragmatic effects of stuff. Because he's soon to be 83. He seems to be in perfectly fine health and all that. But again, if you don't retire now, the odds that you are able to get replaced before the midterms, which are likely to be problematic for the White House party, as they usually are very low. At that point, it's not even about being replaced by a Democrat. It's being replaced, period, because the Republicans have made explicitly clear in the past that they feel that they can hold the seat open forever if they have a Senate majority.
I mean, they've actually said that.
They've straight up said they would vote against it forever. If that's the case, then you're setting up a situation where if you, God forbid, something happens and you are unable to continue serving in, longer than a couple months from now, you're going to put the court in a situation where there's going to be 8 seats for an extended period of time, which is institutionally bad. It was institutionally bad when it happened for a whole term in the Merrick Garland debacle.
Right.
How is any pragmatist doing this? And doing this, look, he's not a beautiful and unique snowflake either. He's very good at his job. But you know who else is good at that job? Any one of the number of elevatable judges who are waiting for an opportunity to
just
move
because
on.
It's a difficult job doesn't mean that it's impossible to replace you.
Yeah.
And I think that after watching Amy Coney Barrett do disgrace to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat, it would be thrown into particularly sharp relief, but that is inaccurate. That's not what happened. And it takes a special kind of self-importance and narcissism to continue. And I don't think it's just a Democrat thing, as you were saying. I think it's really it's only the sort of actual bipartisans that recognize this, because look at, I think that conservatives wanted Justice
Thomas
to resign for the same reasons.
Now, I will, in defense of Justice Thomas here, he actually is a unique and beautiful snowflake in the level to which his judicial philosophy is not something that would be replaced by a pull-off-the-rack conservative appeals court judge, so I can understand how he can justify to himself, I can't retire, because literally nobody thinks the really extreme stuff that I think. So I get that. And to some extent, Alito too. But Thomas, I feel, he feels he has carved out a philosophy that is so unique that no one can replace it. I don't see, and maybe Breyer has convinced himself he has, but I would like to think that he's cognizant that he hasn't really, and that any number of those D.C. Circuit judges are more than capable of doing that job.
Yeah, I mean, and as much as you may think that about, or Thomas may think about his judicial philosophy, the truth is that in terms of actual voting, which is how the majority of these things get done, right? Because Thomas doesn't write the majority of opinions that he signs onto, right?
Sure.
So in terms of actual sort of the math of it, and yeah, there was actually a ton of people that would fill the exact same role.
Yeah. Well, so that's I think that's all our court talk for now, right? We've got a term over. We did not get a retirement, so we've got a few months to sit around and wait before the horror starts again.
Indeed.
Well, what do you want to talk about? Do you want to talk about people going back to the office? Speaking of horrors that will happen again in the fall, so we have talked a bit about how we're in this sort of crucible moment as far as the future of work, where firms have invested a lot in their tech infrastructure. They know that working from home works. People have made decisions over the last year about how they handle their lives, where that work flexibility helps. We have some law firms who are moving forward with, I need everybody back in the office. We have others who are eyeing 3 or 4 day in the office work weeks with the flexibility around that. We did see one firm recently had we're going to do 3 days, but they have to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, which I think is a little weird. I think you're better off allowing flexibility so that not everyone's in the building all at the same time, but whatever. All of this raises the question of where we're going to end up going, and it is going to take a while to shake out. But we did a survey at Above the Law. If you haven't, check it out. We had a survey where we asked hundreds of lawyers, what would it take to get you back in an office or get you to feel like going back to the office was the right thing? For instance, if we gave you a 10% raise, would you be cool giving up work flexibility? And the answer is no. Even though 10% is a large amount of money when people are making a 205 scale, no, 78% said, no, we'd prefer work flexibility over 10% raises. When you moved that to a 20% raise, the numbers didn't actually change.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, slightly more people wanted the work flexibility, but I think that's a rounding error. When you get to a 30% raise, now to be clear, for first years, we're now talking about $60,000 a year worth. It got closer, but it still was almost a 2-to-1 margin preferring work flexibility, which brings us to, if you're a firm right now and you're trying to go hard on the everybody come back to the office, you are really missing a trick, because your associates are willing to take pay cuts to have a firm that is willing to
I don't
do
think
that.
that's accurate.
Well,
I do not think there's that reverse causality in those numbers.
Okay, not take pay cut, to forego pay increases.
I mean, I think a couple of things. I think, first of all, that is probably not true given the volatility of the lateral market, right? That there are plenty of firms offering top of the market money as well as flexibility. And what I think this actually signals to firms is not something that's actually is great for associates, because what it means is that there won't be any official policy that folks could learn about ahead of time, make decisions based upon. Instead, there'll be much more informal ways in which you subtly force people back into the office. I think every firm will say, but of course, if you're needed for a thing, you have to be there. And then all of a sudden there become more and more things that you have to be there for based on, what firms are doing, what your practice group area is, but making it not a policy and making it this kind of informal structure, which I think is what these numbers are actually saying to firms, is don't make an official policy. That is flexibility. No policy is flexibility. And instead, what that means is that there's not a lot of transparency for people either lateraling or new associates entering the big law market. And then that's when the sort of inertia comes in, because once you've already invested the time and money and effort to transfer firms, if you're lateraling, or, start out your career at a firm, your chances of then moving again, or in the first instance, are somewhat lower, right? Because there is inertia. You're already there. It's easier to stay where you are, even if it means slowly you have to increase the number of days in which you are functionally, if not by policy, mandated to be in the office.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel one thing that I'm seeing in the lateral market is a rise in people who are now considering because of technology, considering lateraling in a way that flattens the world a little bit more. For instance, what I'm saying is there are people who work in, say, Nashville, transactional lawyers in Nashville who are like, I'm going to apply to a New York firm because I can do that work. And if we don't have to go into the office, I'll just do that. And that's going to be the real question for these big firms of how far they want to go with this, because there is talent out there that they theoretically could capture if they were just willing to really go in full force with the work flexibility thing. Because, it doesn't necessarily work with all practice groups, but there are definitely practice groups where somebody, a tax lawyer out there, doesn't necessarily need to be in an office. I mean, in my experience, tax lawyers were the people. I feel like the firms I've worked in with tax lawyers, they were treated as the smartest people in the room, which was probably true. And they also were treated like how sometimes they treat monsters in movies where like a bucket of fish heads is thrown into the room and then it's slammed because they just were big brains that you handed a project to, and like 3 hours later they walked out and said, here's the answer. But that's the sort of job that I think you could easily do from a remote location.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there's no role for flexibility, but I do worry that without sort of policies in place, that this sort of informal flexibility has negative impacts that folks aren't really considering. Yeah. Even if you do get hired as, oh, it's okay, you don't really have to be in the office. Maybe you just come in once a month. You could take some, whatever. Even if you are hired in that capacity and it seems like everything works out, if you're maybe it's different if you're a partner level, but if you're an associate trying to forge that path, what does it look like in 2 years when, that kind of office culture has returned and your peers are getting the sort of benefit of FaceTime and perhaps getting better assignments because they are there and they see, partners see their faces in the office, and that kind of informal mentoring that happens in terms of work assignments, in terms of all this stuff. What does that look like if you don't have this sort of formal policy? And even though in the short term, it may seem like, yes, I'm winning because I'm able to live, where my family is in Nashville or wherever, I'm able to do these things and still have the career. I don't know that in 5 years the benefits will be there, or if there won't be, a second class of associate, a full remote associate. Maybe they don't get the promotions at the same rate that you would expect for in-person associates. Yeah. And I think that that's something you really have to think about before you commit to that career path.
Yeah. No, that's very fair. Well, that brings us to the very end of our show here, I think. So you get the last word on that. We're
nice.
Yeah. Well, thanks for listening to the show. You should be subscribed to the show. You should give it reviews, stars, write something, show engagement. You should be reading Above the Law, of course. You should be following us on social media. I'm at Joseph Treese. She's at Catherine1. Numeral 1. You should be checking out the Jabot, her other show. I'm also on the panel of the Legal Tech Week Legal Journalist Roundtable. You should be listening to the other shows by the Legal Talk Network. Thanks again, as always, to Lexicon and Noda, powered by M&T Bank. And I think I just ran through everything in almost record time.
Peace!